You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
We'll try to spice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Yeah. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, where we explore visual arts in an audio medium. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today I'm actually going to be interviewing an artist instead of just talking about an artist. And this man has been creating work that has been living rent-free in my brain for a good year or so since I stumbled across him. Welcome to the podcast, Herb Williams.
Thanks so much for having me.
This is such a great surreal experience for me. I love what you've been doing with the crayons. I love how you transform a seemingly mundane and familiar material into something totally wild and unexpected.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much. It's kind of my favorite thing where I don't know if you have the same, sickness that I do, where I'm constantly fascinated by finding things that I'm very familiar with that somehow have been turned on their head and used in just a new way. It gives me hope or optimism that there is something new under the sun, if we just look at it differently.
Yeah, I am always fascinated by artists who do these things that I never would have thought of. I love people who reimagine stuff. Just like, one of your series, your Master Heist series, I love that. I absolutely love it. In my classroom, one of my favorite challenges for students, I always said, steal this art. And I would put up a collection of artworks and I would say, you need to make something that's not a copy of it, but reimagines it. Apply these principles in a new way. And for those unfamiliar, your Master Heist series, you took classic works of art, Van Gogh's Starry Night. You've got, I think it's Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe, right? And you made them out of crayons. What inspired you to do that?
Man, I mean, I'm not the first artist to steal. I'm going back. I mean, artists have done it throughout centuries, but my favorite is when you can find examples of artists doing it and they riff off each other. So Picasso first said, bad artists copy, good artists steal, right? That's
yes,
Picasso.
And he actually stole that quote from T.S. Eliot.
Right on. I never realized he stole it from T.S. Eliot, but I did find out that Warhol stole it from Picasso and one-upped him and said, good artists copy, great artists steal. And then most recently, Banksy simply stole Picasso's original quote and crossed out Picasso's signature and wrote Banksy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do you even improve on that? And finally, I realized I really want to riff on that. And I started playing with their quotes. And then I was like, I'm going to just create my favorite works of art throughout history and put a whole show together as though I'd invited my friends into my basement of this uber art collector where if price were no object, what would I put in this space? And then I dressed up for the show. I dressed all in black with like a cat burglar, pullover. And I simply would pick up, like I did a Blue Venus after Yves Klein. And I walked out with, I made small children cry when I would pop out behind a Ming Dynasty vase, and thinking like, I'm just going to flat out physically steal these and, make them larger than life. So there's no question that none of this was an actual, what it was. But it just seemed ridiculous and fun and kind of pointing back the finger at the whole art world at like, why can't we see all these together under one roof? I mean, the insurance would be insane to put them all under a roof, but it was so much fun. I think I had the Mona Lisa, Picasso's Mademoiselle's La Avignon, like 6 feet high. So pieces that you never see together. But just to, dream big and then steal it all,
Oh, there's so much I love about that. I absolutely love that you're bringing the fun and the joy to the art, because so many gallery spaces feel so stuffy and just unapproachable. And I love that you're bringing that joy and play to art history. And I gotta say, this episode is going to air during my Arts Madness tournament. I'm curious, as a fellow art history lover, which artist do you think is going to win it all this year in this year's tournament?
Oh man, I mean, I can't predict, but I have my favorites. I really liked your Aztec calendar stone. That's a solid. I love the mystery. I love the culture. I almost got a double major in pre-Columbian art history, just because there's so much work that we're still uncovering and revealing that is every bit as interesting and deep as anything Egyptian, like the pyramids. And it all got it. I feel it never got its due, and I would love to see more people really delve into it and really do a deep dive, because so much of the culture and the language and the history was destroyed, by the colonization. So it's really due its time, and it's a moment in the sun, because it's so fascinating to me.
Absolutely. I cannot agree more. I wish I had more information on the sunstone or the calendar stone, because there is a lot intricate there. I feel like that is an underdog in the tournament up against a lot of heavyweights, but it's probably also one of the heaviest weighted sculptures out there. But we'll see how it does. Now, on to our actual topic for this week's episode. You. I want to start. I always love a good origin story. So just, thinking back, your childhood, your formative experiences, like, how did you get into art? When did you know you wanted to be an artist? What was it like growing up for you? And what sort of shaped that development?
I grew up I tell people LA, but it's Lower Alabama. And, yeah. So it's a great place to be from, a hard place to exist as an artist, because you really are surrounded by a lot of beautiful greenery, but culture is tougher to find. Like I can remember my mom taking me to a Rodin exhibit when I was probably 8 or 9 at a garden in Wetumpka, Alabama, and it blew my mind, just the scale and the structure of these. And that might have been a turning point, but I've always made art. Like, even as a child, I didn't realize it, but when I visit my grandparents, and they had just little pictures of me that they pull out. And I recently had to go back after one of my grandmother passed away, and they left all these pictures to me. And in every picture, I'm holding a fruitcake tin, that you'd get when we were kids. We'd get the fruitcake, and they'd be empty and used as doorstop, but they would always hold for me little crayons and down to the nubs, because we didn't have a lot, and I would use all of them, and I would just carry it everywhere I went. And I was always holding this little fruitcake tin of crayons, just coloring wherever I went, because I didn't fit in or find a lot of things that I was really good at other than creating art. There's a lot of red dirt clay in Lower Alabama, and we have these cliffs behind our house that would erode constantly with the rains. And I discovered pretty early that I could take just a butter knife and carve into the hills and make giant animals, faces, creatures, pretty much anything I want. And then after another good rain, it would wash away, so I was kind of practicing early on to do some land art, or just really getting good with the concept of, ephemeral kind of work. And I not even realizing, but, looking back, I think, you always are kind of drawn to the things which you can't not do. And I've tried so many other things, because being an artist, the struggle is real. I mean, like, we're all, just paycheck to paycheck mostly, most of my friends who are artists are a barista, or they have another job to support their habit, and it's very difficult to make ends meet. And I'm really lucky to have had the success that I do. But I think I've tried everything else simply, to find that it's the one thing I can't not do. I can't stop. Even when you close your eyes, you're constantly thinking of what you're going to make next. And so, I've kind of embraced it and really tried to nurture, that.
Yeah, that I'm so fascinated by that. So, like, crayons were clearly a preferred medium, or maybe just what you had around was the preferred medium. And I can't help but make the connection to, it just feels like your own personal artistic development in some ways mirrors the development of art. At the earliest levels, we were making art out of the land and, carving stuff in, making those glyphs in the sides of in the clay on the side of your house. But yeah, that urge to create, that compulsion almost, I definitely can relate to that. I can't relate to your skill, but I can relate to that urge to create. So if I recall correctly, and I'm going back a while in the memory banks here, but when we spoke about a year ago, you had said that, out of high school, you studied art, right? And then you started working in a foundry. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, you got a great memory. I went to high school. I was lucky enough to have a great art teacher. They got me into AP, which got me a scholarship to college. I studied art in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was the biggest city, in Alabama, and there were museums and galleries. And I felt really lucky, like moving from a small town to a bigger city really opened my eyes until I, then went to New York and realized, wow, how I know nothing. And I was looking for just constantly building on that which I didn't know, and trying to find my own voice in it, because, it's so difficult as an artist to create anything and have it have you feel like it can stand on its own. And everything I was making just felt like I was almost regurgitating my hero, someone that I was looking up to. So
who was that hero?
Oh gosh. At that time, I loved MC Escher's work when I was in college, and then it became the sculptor he's got his own museum in New York, Japanese architect as well, where he's got his own coffee table, the Noguchi, Isamu Noguchi. If you've seen his work, he became kind of my hero in college, and I'd studied putting organic against man-made and the struggle, and to try and find a balance between the two materials, because he's so gifted. Like, if you've ever seen he's got a gorgeous, like, it goes back to my love of the Aztec calendar stone. He's got a giant black sun sculpture in black granite it's transcendent. It is taking the best of early traditional work from all cultures and turning it into like a modern masterpiece. And it's just it's timeless and iconic. And I couldn't get some of the skills that I wanted in college. They didn't have the facilities, and I was searching for a place where I could learn things like, carving out of giant stone blocks and transforming things into bronze. And I studied with a guy off campus in a program where they found alumni to kind of match you to what you wanted to do. And they paired me with this guy named Branko Medenica, who is still around today. He's just a giant of a man, and he makes bronze figurative work and abstract as well, but he does large scale public sculptures. And he would cast his work down in West Palm Beach, Florida. And I would go work for him and learn. And in my senior year in college, he said to me, now if you want to continue to try and study this, there's an opening at this foundry down in West Palm, and I can put in a good word for you. He's like, but I warn you, it is not easy work. Like, there's nothing about it that, I don't know what I would say is enjoyable. It's the hardest work you can do. And wow, was he ever right. I encourage you all to kind of look into it, because it's a lot like working on the surface of the sun. It's really incredible. The whole process is very old world, even with a lot of the modern technology that's added to it. There's still so much that is drawn from ancient techniques that were used to create just timeless bronze works, from the lost wax casting process, where it starts out, where people would bring sculptures to this foundry, like in clay, of a small thing that they would then want as a large scale piece. And we would go through the entire process of taking the clay work, making a mold around it, and then, turning that into a wax sculpture.
Yeah.
And then dipping that into this stuff that's called a slurry, where it's a mixture of almost like cement and sand. And you do various shells to build these ceramic shell molds around the wax to make a very hard protective shell, but that captures all of the detail in it. And you would take that then with the wax sculpture inside it and put these inside a giant oven, where you'd have to suit up like an astronaut, and your gloves would be catching on fire, and walk into like a 2,600 degree oven and, get them hot enough so that it burns all the wax out. And so that they're also hot enough to not explode when you pour liquid bronze into the negative mold. Yeah. And so you take them out, bury them in the dirt, and then pour, liquid bronze, and then break them out of that shell after they cool off a little, and clean them or chase them with, various grinders and implements, and eventually put a patina on them, to color them if for indoor or outdoor. It's fascinating.
Can I ask you one question? Because, okay, I did not study sculpture a ton. I did study sculpture at the Art Institute under a phenomenal artist, Preston Jackson. I highly recommend everybody look up his work. He is amazing. And I was sculpting in foundry wax, making little figures, nothing to write home about. But in that study, I learned a little bit about the technique you talked about, how like, okay, we make a mold of it. And I kind of saw the overview. I wasn't casting my stuff in bronze, but the thing that I never really understood, and I'm hoping you can explain to me, how do you take that and scale it up? Because I can understand how you can make a mold of something. I can understand how you can burn off the wax, and I can understand the temperature stuff, which is very sensitive, but I get the broad strokes of how you got to adjust the heating and cooling and grind it. How do you scale it up? Is someone just like looking at the model and like, yeah, I can make something like that? Or what are you doing?
No, there are various machines. Today it's very different than it was when I was learning. Today, now they're scanning and 3D scanning materials, almost like, you would see with the Zoom goggles and stuff, and people can walk around it with scanners that are kind of based on the cameras that you'd use to play video games with, to map out a smaller sculpture and then to scale it up. But when I was learning, it was kind of beautiful. It was very old world, but like if you had a small scale sculpture, you would set it on a table, and then we had a large, it was called what was it called? The name of it was so unique to just a scaling implement that had a long pole that was connected to various pulleys and ropes that was connected to a larger clay scooping element that you would use to map out various points on the smaller sculpture. And you would have to build large scale pieces so that every time, and it was just, you would add the size of the wheel or gear to then determine what scale you wanted, whether it was 1/12th, 1/25th, whatever. And so the larger implement at the top was physically carving down the wet clay as you were mapping out and touching every piece of the smaller implement. And I mean, it took a lot of work because you would have to make sure that scale wise it worked, and you would just turn each sculpture to match each to make sure that they absolutely matched, that scale wise, because it's very difficult to do that by eye.
Yeah.
It's a 3-dimensional object. It's almost impossible. And this was the only way to guarantee exactness in scale. And it was really cool. I mean, it's very old. It's the same thing that Rodin, would have done.
Yeah.
And just was fascinating to watch, but a lot of work. But we were lucky enough to do, I got to cast one of the last sculptures of Dwayne Hansen while I was there. He was the photorealist. You've probably seen his pieces as tourists in a airport somewhere, and we did the man on riding lawnmower that's in the Whitney. And it's just this guy who's, got a Diet Coke on a John Deere tractor, and he's probably 300 pounds and with a ball cap. And it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal work. Just fascinating.
That is awesome. And it sounds to me like there's a lot of math and technical precision that's over my head. So I want to jump now to something that's slightly less logical that I can maybe kind of pretend to understand, because you said after you left the foundry, you had, started up your own studio practice. You're experimenting with all different stuff. And I absolutely love this story of how you came to begin with crayons. Can you enlighten our audience? What brought you to crayons as your ultimate artistic medium?
Sure. After I left the job at the foundry, I moved up to Nashville and carved out a small studio in the basement storage space of my apartment complex that was, I siphoned electricity in there, probably illegally, and started to make work that I felt was, in my own voice, like this is what I need to be putting out there. And I made so much terrible art. And for just a couple of years, and I kind of drove myself crazy because you're struggling, you're trying to find, it's there, something that's worthwhile, that could stand on its own and wouldn't need any explanation. Like the great works of art are. Everyone wants to create something that could go in a museum opposite one of their heroes. So they have this dialogue, and everything I made, I just felt was terrible. And so I did this for like a year and a half, and my wife at the time was like, just go and get a job. You're angry, you're dark, we're starving, she, was threatening to leave me. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go and I'll get the job as the barista and wash my hands of this. I can't find it. And so I had a bonfire of sorts where I burned a lot of my work, just early work that I felt was just awful. And I was so angry. And I fell asleep and just exhausted. And that night I had one of the most powerful dreams I've ever had. And in it, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art called me, and they said, Mr. Williams, we want to offer you a retrospective, of your work. And I was like, great. I was like, hey, by the way, what is it of my work that y'all want to want to show. Like I could
Smart man, even in your dreams,
even in
picking
the
up
dream,
the advice.
trying to get them to reveal it to me. And they're like, we love all of your work, so we're just trust you to bring what you've done to us. Great. And then so it shows me in the studio making work, but it's very blurry. And so finally I get to go to the exhibit to see what I've done. And I don't know if you've ever been to the SF MoMA. It's amazing and gigantic. It's just, I saw a Keith Haring retrospective in '98, and it was so powerful and so overwhelming that it probably influenced that dream, I'm sure. But so many things that I do. He was just brilliant. And on every wall, on every surface was a small crawling animal. And it was an iguana in the dream, and it changed medium every next sculpture. And I was like, oh, okay, that's odd, but strangely compelling. It made sense in the show. And it was all the traditional mediums as I walked in, like wood, stone, steel, glass, clay. And then it became a little more obscure, like more interesting, unusual objects and things you'd find like Q-tips and paper clips and erasers, and going through all these different materials. And I saw one in crayons, and it so shocked me in the dream that I woke right up, and luckily had the sketchbook by the bed, and I started drawing it out. And I've been doing it ever since. I don't know if it's divine intervention or probably just your subconscious working out what you can't. Just seeing enough things. And man, it's the one thing I've found that I'm continually challenged by. And I love what it does to the form, because I can't ever really predict what it will do. I'm 20 years into it. This was back when I had the dream. It was probably around 2002. So we're 21, 22 years now since. And I'm still playing with crayons.
And I find that so fascinating on a number of levels. Crayons as a medium, there's a sensory element that, I can, even though I don't have a crayon in front of me right now, I know that smell, and when I see them, when I touch them, it brings back memories of my earliest art classes. And I think that's part of what just immediately resonates and brings joy when I look at your sculptures. And I am so curious about how you transform that into a sculpture and some of the practical stuff. And I want to get into that. So after the break, I am going to ask you a little bit about your process and see if I can wrangle a commitment for you to invite me when and if you have that retrospective in the real world. So
your lips to God's ears right there.
Now we're back talking with Herb Williams, one of my favorite contemporary artists who does just amazingly joyful and fun sculptures out of crayons. I look at crayons and I think I'm going to make a mediocre drawing. You look at crayons and think I am going to sculpt something mind-blowing out of wax. I'm so curious, how exactly does that happen? Because I've studied a little bit of sculpture. As I said, in college, I sculpted in wax and burned myself quite a bit as I'm holding up the lighter and trying to melt it and trying to do all that stuff. What can you just explain? What is your process for creation? How does a piece begin? Are you starting with a concept, a subject? Are you starting with a vision of the final product and then you work out connections? And, just physically, how do you do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of processes to the work, but I start out like every other artist. I do a lot of sketching. I've got dozens of sketchbooks that I go through and make a lot of notes, make a lot of lists. I love lists, love to make them, but the drawing and the work in the sketchbook is where it all starts. And trying to make something compelling and interesting that would keep me invested in it is where the hard work starts. But I'm always thinking about the form and what kind of, not accident, but what surprise will happen within it that I can kind of surprise myself with. So I'm constantly trying to find something that is better than what I did last, and that's the tough part. But once you've got a drawing sketched out, like let's say it's a fox, I've just finished a fox or a rabbit or a fawn in my studio, and I'm really always inspired by nature. I'm based here in Nashville, and the city is just booming. It's still the smallest big city, for those of y'all that are in big places. But for me, from a very small town, I would much rather see a fox or a rabbit or a deer when I turn down an alley than, the bachelorettes who have taken over our city. And so they're continually inspiring and colorful. So like to do a red fox, I would sculpt it out, and I start with welding together a steel armature that I would then build over. So I'll take steel rebar, it's real common, and just cut them and weld them into a basic skeleton that's strong, and then build over that with wood and then with foam and carve that to create more of the 3D, the dimensionality of it, to get it into a shape that is compelling and has movement to it. Mm-hmm. But the trick is when you add the crayons to it, you have to guess that kind of real thick, almost like a winter coat, will happen, and what the sculpture should look like, almost a starved creature, basically, that I'm creating beforehand. And I use that steel and foam and wood to keep it as lightweight as I can, because I will then fiberglass over that. Because I used to just do things primarily in wood, and they're great until you get to like a tail or a paw and you have to ship something, and it will snap invariably. So the fiberglass over the steel is the one thing I've found that I've been really happy with, and it's strong but yet lightweight enough to where mainly I can move it myself. And then I will let that dry. It's a nasty process, and if you can find someone to help you with fiberglass, I highly recommend it. It's my least favorite thing. And then I'll paint it to what, almost like a paint by number, so that I'm using it as a template to when I begin to cover it with crayons. And so I've got my form created, which is the majority of the work, not the majority, but a lot of it goes into that. And then I'll get my crayons, and I get the Crayola crayons directly from Crayola themselves in quantities of 3,000 of a single color in a 50-pound case. And I do that because I've tried casting my own, and they're just not the same. I can't get the smell right, and there is something about the Crayola. It is one of the top 10 most recognizable scents on the planet, so that's kind of my threshold into fooling people, that they, are familiar with my work before they even know who I am, and it's a great, it's amazing kind of step. But I also like it in studying art history. I found out about the Fluxus art movement, where they're interested in art that it appeals to more than one of the senses, and to appeal to people's sense of smell as well as have a tactile quality to it. It's one of my favorite things. And I could never produce the right scent with the wax. And I found out Crayola is more guarded about the scent than they are about the pigmentation or anything. Like it's wild.
That's interesting. It's almost like it's art for people with synesthesia, which is like the combining of senses. One sense triggers another. Which who was it? Kandinsky had synesthesia, but
Yeah.
I digress. I am curious. How did you get Crayola to just start shipping you like thousands and thousands of crayons? Did you just like bang on the doors of the factory and be like, "Look, I know this is good. Just hear me out on this. I'm gonna do something. It's gonna work."
I had to become a problem for them before they would even listen to me, because I had no idea you could get them in those quantities. Anybody can go online and get a box or a case of 64, and they will custom pack it. It's very expensive, it's like $10 a box, but you can get a custom 64 box of all carnation pink or sky blue. And those are their most popular that people buy and give as gifts to, folks who've had a new baby. And so once I found out I could do that, I would order cases and cases. And that was where my material costs went into. And that's how you learn it becomes very expensive very quick to become a sculptor. But I ordered so many that Crayola began shipping me these giant boxes with lots of cases inside. And I would begin to get cases that I didn't order by mistake, and I would see other people's names on them, and I would have to call customer service, and it became a real thing to where finally they put me through to a lady who, like, after the 6th or 7th time, she's like, "Okay, who are you? What are you even doing?" I was you have to become a monkey in the wrench before you can get the grease kind of thing. And she's like, I'm so sick of this. Like, I don't care. We're making you a wholesaler. And I'm like, what? So like, yeah, you've spent enough money. You have to spend a lot of money with them before you qualify. But I became in most aspect a Walmart, basically.
Yeah.
To now I get these cases delivered by a giant truck and pallet, and I have to sign off on things. But the sculptures require that. Each sculpture, there are about 9 crayons per square inch in each sculpture. So a fox will take about 35,000 crayons, which is crazy. And that's like how many? That's like 12, 13 cases. So
yeah.
It's nuts how many times you have to touch it and cut the crayons before it becomes something that has its own kind of life,
So then I'm curious, like, as you described the process, just getting back to my original point, it sounds like it was largely almost a traditional sculpture process. You're building the form using, steel and wood and fiberglass, and you're painting it to give a guide for where the crayons will go. But then how do you physically attach the crayons? Are you sitting there, the way that I used to with foundry wax, like holding up a lighter and melting the tip so it sticks on the inside? Because I imagine like you're not just standing there with a bottle of Elmer's.
Right. I mean, there was a lot of trial and error in that. I'm the only artist doing this sculpturally because it is so difficult and time consuming. Because I've had other people come to me and ask me, how do you do it? Can you teach me? I'm like, sure. And by the time, we get a good, halfway into it, they're like, you can have it. Ridiculous. Because it is, I need the paper jacket or the sleeve of the crayon to help bond it to itself and to the form, because a traditional wax work, like an encaustic work, which is a wall-mounted piece that have been around for centuries, like Caravaggio, Da Vinci.
Yeah.
They're still encaustics that are with us. They can last. But sculpturally, they're much more vulnerable and fragile to crack and keep a consistent, dimensionality to it, it's really difficult. And so I needed the paper sleeve to then bond to the form, and where I get these, this adhesive. I had to find a place out of Texas that makes industrial adhesive that's archival, that museums will accept, to really join all of this and make a strong enough bond that I can work the workability of it and the time with which it's going to dry and bond have to be, I have to have some workability, but as you're working around a form, it's virtually impossible to do a traditional encaustic. And so I kind of had to create my own technique with that. And it's different, but it's part of the process, man. But you have to touch something several, hundreds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of times to complete it once it takes on that kind of crayon look.
I think what's amazing to me is how at first glance the work seems so fun and whimsical, and yet as you describe the process, there's such depth of knowledge and so many different dimensions that have to be considered, and processes and materials and the interactions of those different materials. Just hats off to you, man. It's impressive. I love to see people who are good at what they do and do it at a high level. And the more I learn, the more I just am appreciating what I'm seeing in front of me. So
thanks.
So you have to consider the archival qualities of the adhesive that you're using. Do you then have to do any sort of like a seal coat on it?
I have that conversation a lot with the folks who own them, whether it's a museum or an airport or a children's hospital, or, the average collector who just wants to put it in their house. And it really depends upon what you want to do with it. For lobbies where people are tempted to touch it, typically just a plexiglass box covering it is enough. I have not found a sealant to put over it that really doesn't destroy it, and become a barrier in itself that you can't see. You see it. And I want to see the crayons, it becomes its own thing. You shouldn't have to put too many barriers between you and the art, or it just loses all its luster. Other places where, like if it's in a children's hospital, I have cast the entire work and then hand painted it so that it looks exactly like it. Yeah. You talk about time consuming, but it lasts forever, and then, but you don't get the smell as well. And most people want both the smell and the feel. And, I try to tell people, art is a lot like a dog that you're not familiar with. You may want to pet them, but until you know them, or you own them, you try not to pet the art. It's a great compliment to me, but unless you own it, you don't want to touch it too much. I try to look at it that way.
Yeah. Now, I guess it's a little bit of a segue. I want to wrap up with just like two more questions. One would be, because this is a show that people of all ages can listen to and appreciate, for any younger aspiring artists, what advice would you give?
I think dreaming big is my favorite. Like, take the largest risk you can, where you can still get away with it and not have to leave the country if it fails. Try to think as large as you can. The things that inspire me are, not necessarily the scale of the work, but the concept, where it's just incredible. And it can be a simple concept, but just done in a way that, like, wow, man, just the time and effort in that. I'm working on a room right now, a series of rooms where each is based upon a single color, where you can go in and it's a complete kind of paradigm shift where how you perceive individual color. So imagine a room where every object in it is in a shade of a particular color, like a blue room that I've just finished, where I've got like Hokusai's wave. It's just the feminine wave, which is a nicer detail. And I've got mirrors on the wall that are not reflective, but they look like almost a comic book mirror, and they're reflecting in blue. There's a beach ball and an umbrella in shades of blue, that kind of thing. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, and it's a contemplative space. And I'm inviting people in not so much to take selfies inside it, but to imagine the art within them. I love reading about art and finding that our perception is clouded by our own involvement in art, where it's so difficult to perceive the meaning of it without putting ourselves in it. And it takes upon entirely new meaning when we're engaged in it. And that, it just blows my mind. And I try to, engage with all of it. So I'm really inviting people to become part of it, to dress in their favorite color and imagine themselves as part of it, almost like a narrative, the narrative photography moment where they would stage things and then put those photographs in a museum with actors, who they had created them for, like a Sandy Skoglund kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of thing that really inspires me and just kind of blows my mind, because color is so personal, and I'm going to perceive it entirely different than you will. And so I'm really interested in different people walking through a space and perceiving it, and then stepping out in like a gray or white, like a palate cleanser, so that when you have like a 7-course meal, you have to have something, that kind of resets your body before you can perceive another. But I'm really just enjoying playing with color as an entire perception kind of changing moment. And my own little like Yayoi Kusama kind of, not an infinity room, but a variation on it, where you do in a kind of experiential space. And so I'm hoping to create enough of these that I can pitch it to like the SF MoMA or a major museum. You could go into all of them and, really have fun with color and see how that affects people.
Well, I absolutely love that. Just that idea of fully immersing yourself. I think that's kind of the best advice that a young aspiring artist, really of any age, can have, is to really invest yourself in the time and the effort to get down into the weeds and everything with that. And you already hit off. I said I had 2 questions, and you already hit both of them, because my second question was going to be, what is next for you? And so now I'm talking and trying to think of a way to wrap this up and land the plane at the same time. And so I'm going to go back to the question that I foreshadowed before the break. If you get that retrospective at SF MoMA, or we'll say my local museum at the Art Institute of Chicago, if you get that installation, can I get the VIP ticket?
Completely. I'll have you dress in your favorite color and become part of the art in that. Man, yeah, the Art Institute's incredible, man. I highly encourage people to go there. It's just one of those paradigm shift moments where you can encounter art. It's seeing it in person is so important, and it just changes your perspective immediately. So I hope everyone can go. I'd be honored, to show there.
And we've got you on the record now. If that happens at either of those museums, or I'm just gonna throw it out there, any other major cultural institutions, you're bringing me along. And thank you so much for taking the time to come record with me. It has been a surreal honor. I absolutely love your work. Highly encourage everyone check the links in the show notes. I will put your Instagram, your website, all of that stuff on there. But thank you so much, Herb Williams.
Thanks so much. My pleasure.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.